Imagine this. You've done everything right. You followed the path laid out before you, the education, the career, the relationships, the possessions, the things that were supposed to bring fulfillment. You reached for the benchmarks society promised would deliver satisfaction. And yet in those quiet moments when you're truly honest with yourself, there's that persistent emptiness, that nagging sense that something fundamental is missing. Why is it that the more options we have, the more lost we feel? We live in the most abundant time in human history. Unlimited information at our fingertips, more career possibilities than ever before, freedom to reinvent ourselves repeatedly. And yet, this abundance has not delivered what it promised. Instead, it's left so many of us paralyzed, confused, and disconnected, not just from others, but from ourselves. Have you ever wondered why you can simultaneously have everything and nothing? Why success often feels hollow once achieved? Why the things you longed for most leave you wanting something else the moment you obtain them? There's a peculiar madness to modern existence that few dare to name. We're achieving more while feeling less, connecting more while experiencing greater isolation, knowing more while understanding less. It's as if the very achievements we've been taught to value have become the obstacles to what we truly seek. Consider the contradiction at the heart of your existence right now. You likely possess more knowledge, comfort, and opportunity than 99% of humans who have ever lived. Yet anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness have reached epidemic proportions. How can we explain this profound disconnect? The answer lies in a psychological truth so fundamental that we've become blind to it. A truth that Carl Jung understood nearly a century ago, but that our hyperactive, achievement-obsessed culture has all but forgotten. What if I told you that the very way you've been taught to search for meaning is what prevents you from finding it? That the maps you've been given, the cultural narratives about success, happiness, and purpose are not just incomplete, but fundamentally misleading. Think about the last time you felt truly alive. Chances are it wasn't when you received a promotion or bought something expensive. It wasn't when you reached a milestone that impressed others. It was likely a moment when you weren't thinking about yourself at all, when you were so immersed in something that your ego temporarily dissolved. A moment of connection, creation, or wonder that transcended your ordinary concerns. Why are these moments so rare? And more importantly, why do we spend so little time pursuing the states that bring us genuine aliveness, while dedicating our lives to pursuits that repeatedly fail to fulfill us? The modern world has placed us in an impossible bind. We're told to find ourselves by looking outward, through achievement, acquisition, and approval. Yet what we're really searching for can only be found by turning inward, into territories that our culture has taught us to ignore or devalue. There's a profound reason why you feel lost, despite having a clear path. Empty, despite having plenty. Restless, despite being comfortable. It's the same reason why more choices have made us less decisive, more connections have made us more isolated, and more information has made us less wise. Something has been systematically stripped from modern life, something essential to human wholeness that Jung recognized as vital, but that has been sacrificed on the altar of progress, efficiency, and rational certainty. The real tragedy isn't that you feel lost. The real tragedy is that you've been looking for yourself in all the wrong places because you were never shown where to look. The maps you've been given are designed to lead you everywhere except where your authentic self resides. What if the sense of lostness isn't a failure on your part, but actually a crucial signal, a psyche in revolt against a shallow existence? What if your discontent is actually the first stirring of wisdom? Jung understood that what appears to be a crisis of meaning is actually an invitation to depth. That the symptoms of lostness, Anxiety, emptiness, fragmentation are not problems to be eliminated, but messengers pointing toward wholeness. He realized that the soul, denied expression in our conscious lives, will demand attention through our suffering. But before we can understand the solution, we need to recognize the true nature of the problem. And it runs far deeper than most of us realize, reaching into the very foundations of how we've been taught to know ourselves and navigate reality. Because the real reason you're lost isn't what you think. It's not because you've made wrong choices, or lack information, or haven't found your passion. It's because you've been searching for yourself using methods that could never possibly lead you home. Jung recognized, and what our culture has spent decades systematically obscuring, is that the modern human exists in a state of profound psychological fragmentation. We have severed the connection between our conscious and unconscious minds, creating an internal civil war that manifests as the very emptiness you feel. This isn't merely about inauthenticity. It's about the gradual construction of a false self that becomes so convincing that we mistake it for who we truly are. Your persona is the collection of roles, achievements, and behaviors that win approval from others. It's the self that knows how to navigate social expectations, excel at work, maintain relationships, and project success. There's nothing inherently wrong with the persona. We all need one to function in society. The crisis occurs when the persona becomes all you know of yourself, when your identity becomes fully externalized, defined exclusively by your relation to the outside world rather than by any internal compass. Nietzsche foresaw this crisis over a century ago when he proclaimed that God is dead. What he meant wasn't simply about religious belief, but about the death of any transcendent source of meaning. Without vertical orientation, connection to something beyond the material world, humans would be left with only horizontal reference points, comparison to others, societal benchmarks, and external validation. This is precisely what has happened. Your sense of lostness stems from having only external reference points for your identity. You know who you are in relation to others, but you have no idea who you are in relation to yourself. As philosopher Martin Heidegger described it, we've fallen into a state of forgetfulness of being, so caught up in the day-to-day management of our lives and social positioning that we've forgotten to ask the most fundamental questions about existence itself. We mistake having for being. We confuse our social utility with our inherent worth. We've become, in the words of Heidegger, homeless in a metaphysical sense. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, articulated this problem precisely. Ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. The psychological void you feel is what Frankl called the existential vacuum, a state of inner emptiness resulting from a lack of meaning that no external achievement can fill. This void doesn't arise by accident. It's the inevitable result of what Jung identified as the psychic inflation of modern consciousness, an overdevelopment of rational, analytical thinking at the expense of the deeper, symbolic, and intuitive dimensions of the psyche. Our education system, career paths, and vision of success all prioritize linear thinking, measurable outcomes, and conscious control. These are the qualities of what Jung called the ego consciousness, just one small province of our much larger psychological kingdom. But there's another realm within you that operates according to different principles entirely. Jung called it the unconscious. But unlike Freud, who saw it primarily as a repository of repressed desires, Jung recognized it as a creative, autonomous, and intelligent dimension of the psyche with its own agenda and wisdom. The unconscious communicates through symbols, dreams, synchronicities, and emotions, languages that our rational minds have been trained to dismiss as irrational, subjective, or meaningless. When you ignore these communications, the unconscious doesn't simply go away. It intensifies its efforts to be heard, often through suffering, your anxiety, your restlessness, your sense of emptiness. These are not pathologies to be eliminated. They are messengers from the neglected dimensions of your psyche, demanding integration. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this dilemma when he wrote about the anguish of freedom, the vertigo that comes from recognizing that external authorities and ready-made meanings cannot save us from the responsibility of creating meaning for ourselves. But Sartre didn't go far enough. The existentialists recognized the void, but missed what Jung understood. That meaning isn't something we invent out of nothing. It emerges through relationship with the deeper dimensions of our own being. Consider how modern society systematically severs this relationship. From childhood, you're taught to orient outward. Success is measured by external metrics, grades, income, social status, possessions. You learn to value what can be quantified and displayed over what can only be felt and experienced. You're rewarded for developing certain aspects of yourself: rational thinking, productivity, social adaptability, while other equally essential dimensions, intuition, contemplation, emotional depth, are treated as irrelevant or even obstacles to success. The result is a profound imbalance in your psychic economy. You've developed a hyper-specialized conscious identity that knows how to function in the world, but has lost touch with the broader spectrum of your being. And this specialized identity, focused on control, achievement, and social validation, is structurally incapable of providing what the soul most deeply craves: wholeness, meaning, and authentic connection. As philosopher Alan Watts put it, we've been taught to use our minds not to realize who we are, but to define who we are. The difference is crucial. Definition creates boundaries, limitations, fixed identity. Realization opens us to the fluid, evolving, multidimensional nature of our being. The Swiss psychologist Alice Miller described how this psychological fragmentation begins in childhood, as we learn to suppress our authentic responses in favor of behaviors that win parental and social approval. We develop what she called a false self that conforms to external expectations while our true needs and feelings are driven underground. This isn't just a phase we go through. For many, it becomes a permanent arrangement, with the false self permanently in charge of our lives while our authentic being remains undeveloped. This is why success so often feels empty when achieved. Your achievements validate and strengthen your persona, the socially constructed identity that knows how to succeed. But they do nothing to nourish the deeper dimensions of your psyche that hunger for meaning, depth, and wholeness. Your lostness is therefore not a matter of making wrong choices within the map you've been given. It's about recognizing that the map itself is fundamentally incomplete. It charts only the visible, measurable, socially validated territory of human experience, while leaving the most essential regions, the unconscious, the symbolic, the soul, completely unmarked. And this incomplete map hasn't emerged by accident. It serves powerful cultural and economic interests. A fragmented human being, cut off from their inner depths and hungrily seeking fulfillment through consumption, achievement, and external validation, is the perfect citizen of the modern economic system. Your disconnection from yourself is extremely profitable for those selling solutions to the emptiness it creates. What we're confronting is not merely a personal psychological challenge, but a collective spiritual crisis, one that Jung identified as the central problem of modern humanity. The symptom is your sense of lostness. The cause runs much deeper than you've been led to believe. Split between conscious and unconscious, between the persona you present to the world and the fuller spectrum of your being, creates consequences far more devastating than mere dissatisfaction. It fundamentally warps your relationship with yourself, others, and reality itself. The first unseen consequence is what Jung called projection. When aspects of yourself remain unconscious, you don't experience them directly. Instead, you project them onto the external world and experience them as if they originate from outside yourself. Your unacknowledged aggression becomes the world's hostility toward you. Your denied creativity becomes envy of others' self-expression. Your unexplored spiritual longing becomes judgment of those seeking deeper meaning. This mechanism explains why the world often seems to reflect back to you the very qualities you've disowned in yourself. It's not cosmic irony, it's projection. And it creates a distorted lens through which you perceive everything. You're not seeing reality as it is. You're seeing it refracted through the prism of your unintegrated psyche. The cognitive scientist Ian McGilchrist describes this as the tyranny of the left hemisphere of the brain, the part specialized for narrow focus, categorization, and manipulation over the right hemisphere, which perceives context, relationship, and meaning. Our entire culture has become increasingly left hemisphere dominant, creating what McGilchrist calls the divided brain. We excel at taking things apart but struggle to perceive wholeness. We accumulate facts while losing wisdom. We analyze endlessly but synthesize rarely. This explains why more information hasn't made you less lost. The problem is, under lack of information. It's a fragmented mode of perception that cannot integrate what it knows into a meaningful whole. The second unseen consequence is a phenomenon Jung called compensation. When conscious and unconscious fall too far out of balance, the psyche attempts to restore equilibrium, often through dramatic and disruptive means. This is why people who have spent decades building rational, controlled, successful lives suddenly sabotage everything with seemingly irrational decisions. It's why the corporate executive has a midlife crisis, why the perfect parent suddenly abandons their family, why the disciplined achiever falls into addiction. These aren't simply failures of willpower. They're compensatory movements of the psyche attempting to correct a fundamental imbalance. As Jung put it, what we resist persists, what we fight fights back. When you systematically exclude essential parts of yourself from your conscious identity, they don't disappear. They return in distorted, often destructive forms. This pattern operates not just individually but collectively. Our culture's compulsive productivity, addiction to distraction, and obsession with youth and novelty are compensatory responses to our denied relationship with depth, stillness, mortality, and meaning. We're running not towards something but away from the void we sense within. The third consequence is perhaps the most insidious, the development of what Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains not only the parts of yourself that you consider dark or negative, but also your unlived positive potentials, your denied creativity, passion, tenderness, power, and depth. When these qualities remain unconscious, they don't simply lie dormant. They actively undermine your conscious intentions. This is why you sabotage the very goals you set for yourself. Why relationships follow destructive patterns despite your best intentions. Why you remain stuck in cycles of behavior that you intellectually understand are harmful. The shadow operates autonomously, beyond the reach of conscious control or rational understanding. Neurologically, this manifests in what scientists call implicit bias. Unconscious associations and judgments that influence behavior despite conscious beliefs. Your brain has formed neural pathways based not just on what you consciously believe, but on everything you've absorbed throughout your life, much of it below the threshold of awareness. These unconscious patterns drive behavior more powerfully than conscious intention. This explains the gap between what you know and what you do, between your aspirations and your actual life. Your conscious mind sets goals and makes plans, but your unconscious, with its own agenda and priorities, determines whether those plans come to fruition. The fourth consequence affects your capacity for genuine connection. When you're alienated from yourself, authentic relationship becomes impossible. You present your persona, your acceptable, curated self, while hiding the rest. Others do the same. The result isn't true meeting, but a carefully choreographed interaction between masks. As philosopher Martin Buber described it, you engage in I-it relationships rather than I-thou encounters, treating others as objects to be managed rather than subjects to be met. This creates the modern paradox of simultaneous hyperconnectivity and profound isolation. You can interact with hundreds of people daily without ever feeling truly seen or known. Each interaction reinforces your persona while driving your authentic self further into hiding. The more you succeed socially, the more alienated you become from yourself. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is the loss of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you uniquely are. When your identity is constructed primarily from external sources, cultural narratives, social roles, others' expectations, you forfeit the discovery of your singular path. You live someone else's life rather than your own. This isn't just a philosophical concern, it's profoundly practical. Your unique combination of qualities, experiences, wounds, and gifts contains the seeds of your particular purpose. When you live from your persona rather than your wholeness, you miss the very contribution that only you can make. The world loses what only you could have given it. Aldous Huxley captured this tragedy in Brave New World, depicting a society where comfort and conformity replace authentic human development. The horror of Huxley's dystopia isn't that people are oppressed, but that they've lost the capacity to recognize their own diminishment. They've sacrificed depth for comfort, meaning for pleasure, individuality for belonging. This is increasingly our reality. The technological and social systems that shape modern life weren't designed to facilitate human wholeness or depth. They were optimized for efficiency, profit, control, and scale. Your sense of lostness isn't an incidental byproduct of these systems, it's their inevitable outcome. The final, unseen consequence brings us full circle to Jung's central insight. Psychic energy follows attention. What you focus on expands. When your attention is continuously directed outward toward achievement, acquisition, and approval, your inner life atrophies. The muscles of introspection, symbolic thinking, and depth perception weaken from disuse. The capacity to discern meaning, to feel wonder, to experience genuine aliveness diminishes not because it's lost, but because it's untrained. This creates a vicious cycle. The emptier you feel, the more desperately you seek fulfillment through external means, which only reinforces the patterns that created the emptiness in the first place. Each achievement, purchase, or validation provides a momentary hit of satisfaction before the hunger returns, stronger than before. What you're experiencing isn't simply an individual struggle, but a collective initiation, a crisis that contains within it the seeds of transformation. But that transformation cannot occur through the same consciousness that created the problem. It requires a fundamental shift in how you know yourself and navigate reality. Jung discovered, and what has been systematically obscured by our efficiency-obsessed, productivity-worshipping culture, is that the path to wholeness requires not further fragmentation, but integration. Not more doing, but a different quality of being. Not endless self-improvement, but radical self-acceptance. This is the rebellion, to reclaim the disowned parts of your psyche, not by trying to fix or control them, but by meeting them with consciousness and compassion. Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the divided self into a more complete and authentic whole. The first radical act is to question the maps you've been given. The cultural narratives about success, happiness, and meaning aren't neutral descriptions of reality. They're prescriptions that serve specific interests and perpetuate specific power structures. What if the very metrics by which you measure your life, productivity, achievement, wealth, influence, are actually impediments to the deeper fulfillment you seek? Consider how revolutionary it would be to evaluate your life, not by what you've accomplished or acquired, but by how fully you've lived, by how deeply you've loved, by how courageously you've expressed your unique gifts, by how completely you've embraced both the light and shadow within yourself. Jung recognized that genuine transformation begins with confronting what he called the shadow, not to eliminate it, but to integrate it. The shadow contains not just your denied darkness, but your disowned light, the creative, passionate, powerful aspects of yourself that didn't fit the roles you were assigned. The integration process begins with a simple but profound shift, turning toward what you've been running from, learning to stay present with discomfort rather than numbing it, welcoming emotions rather than suppressing them, getting curious about the parts of yourself you've judged or rejected. This isn't just psychological theory, it's neuroscience. Research on neuroplasticity confirms that attention literally reshapes the brain. When you consistently direct attention toward your internal experience with acceptance rather than judgment, you create new neural pathways. You develop what neuroscientists call response flexibility, the capacity to respond consciously rather than react automatically. The philosopher Simone Weil understood this when she wrote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." By offering attention to the neglected dimensions of your being, you generate the conditions for healing and integration. This practice requires courage. It means facing the pain, fear, and grief you've been avoiding. It means acknowledging the ways you've betrayed yourself by living according to others' expectations. It means mourning the unlived life, the creative pursuits abandoned, the authentic expressions suppressed, the deeper calling ignored in favor of security or approval. But here's what Jung understood that modern self-help often misses. This confrontation with shadow isn't about fixing or improving yourself. It's about becoming more fully who you already are. The goal isn't to create a better, more successful persona, but to establish a living relationship with the deeper dimensions of your psyche. Throughout history, those who've undertaken this journey have described it as a form of death and rebirth. The dissolution of a limited identity gives way to the emergence of a more authentic, integrated self. This isn't metaphorical. It's a lived experience of fundamental transformation. Joseph Campbell called it the hero's journey, the archetypal pattern of departure from the known world, confrontation with challenges, and return with expanded consciousness. What's remarkable is how consistently this pattern appears across cultures and throughout history, suggesting that it reflects something fundamental about human psychological development. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition describes a practice called Tonglen, taking in suffering and sending out compassion. Rather than avoiding pain, you move toward it with an open heart. This counterintuitive approach doesn't increase suffering, but transforms it, creating space where there was previously constriction. The Japanese concept of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, offers another powerful metaphor. The breaks aren't hidden, but highlighted, becoming the most beautiful part of the object. Similarly, your wounds and imperfections, when met with consciousness, become sources of unique beauty and strength. These traditions point to a profound truth. Integration happens not by eliminating the broken or shadow aspects, but by bringing them into relationship with light and awareness. Poet Leonard Cohen captured this perfectly. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. This approach radically challenges the predominant cultural narrative that equates well-being with the absence of discomfort. True wholeness isn't the elimination of suffering, but the capacity to hold all human experience, joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss, within a larger field of meaning and acceptance. Those who've traveled this path report something surprising. What they once perceived as the goal, happiness, success, contentment, becomes less important than the quality of presence they bring to each moment. They discover that freedom lies not in controlling circumstances, but in relating differently to whatever arises. Psychologist Carl Rogers observed this in his clients, noting that those who experience the deepest healing didn't necessarily have fewer problems, but developed greater capacity to meet life's challenges with openness and flexibility. They became, in his words, more fully functioning persons. This shift from controlling to witnessing, from fixing to accepting, from performing to being, represents not just a psychological adjustment, but a spiritual awakening, a recognition that you are not merely your conscious ego, but something far more vast and mysterious. Jung understood this when he wrote about the self with a capital S, the organizing center of the psyche that transcends yet includes the ego. Through dreams, intuitions, synchronicities, and creative inspiration, the self communicates, guiding the individuation process toward greater wholeness. The practical path involves specific practices that build the capacity for this deeper relationship with yourself. First, create space for silence. In a world designed to capture and monetize your attention, reclaiming periods of undistracted presence is a revolutionary act. Second, attend to your dreams. Dreams speak in the language of the unconscious, symbols, images, emotions, bypassing your analytical mind to deliver messages from deeper dimensions of your psyche. By recording and reflecting on dreams without imposing rigid interpretations, you establish communication with your unconscious mind. Third, examine your projections. When you react strongly to someone, with attraction or repulsion, admiration or judgment, ask what quality in them you might be denying in yourself. Your emotional triggers are signposts pointing toward disowned aspects of your psyche. Fourth, engage in expressive practices, writing, movement, art, that bypass your analytical mind and access deeper knowing. These aren't hobbies, but essential practices for psychological integration, allowing the unconscious to communicate through non-verbal symbolic means. Finally, cultivate what Jung called active imagination, a state of reverie where you dialogue with different aspects of your psyche, allowing images and insights to emerge spontaneously. This isn't fantasy, but a structured approach to establishing relationship with your unconscious mind. What emerges from these practices isn't just psychological integration, but a profound shift in how you experience reality. The world becomes not a collection of separate objects to be manipulated, but an interconnected field of meaning to be participated in. You move from spectator to participant in your own life. This represents the true rebellion against a culture that would keep you fragmented, distracted, and endlessly consuming. It's not loud or dramatic. It's a quiet revolution of consciousness that changes everything without changing anything outwardly. If the most profound truth about your lostness is that it was never a mistake? What if your disconnection, your suffering, your sense of incompleteness were not failures to be corrected, but invitations to a deeper awakening? Here is the ultimate revelation that Jung understood and that changes everything. The crisis of meaning that you've been experiencing isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's evidence that something is trying to go right. Your psyche is not broken, it's evolving. Your suffering is not punishment, it's initiation. The emptiness you feel is not the absence of meaning. It's the space being cleared for a more authentic meaning to emerge. The old structures of identity, based on achievement, appearance, approval, acquisition, are dissolving not because you've failed, but because you've outgrown them. The discomfort you feel isn't illness but metamorphosis. Jung recognized what few modern psychologists acknowledge, that the human psyche has a teleological dimension, an inherent drive toward wholeness and integration. The unconscious isn't merely a repository of repressed material, it's an intelligent, purposeful dimension of your being with its own agenda for your development. The uncomfortable truth, and the liberating one, is that your conscious ego is not the author of your life. It's a participant in a much larger unfolding that includes forces and intelligences beyond its comprehension or control. The ego's job isn't to direct this process, but to cooperate with it, to become a willing partner in your own evolution. This realization fundamentally transforms how you relate to your struggles. What if your anxiety isn't a disorder, but your system's intelligence alerting you to inauthenticity? What if your depression isn't a chemical imbalance, but your soul's refusal to participate in a life too small for your spirit? What if your existential crisis isn't a problem to solve, but the dissolution of an obsolete identity making way for a more authentic self? This perspective doesn't minimize suffering, it recontextualizes it within a larger framework of meaning. As Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Growth requires the death of old patterns, beliefs, and identities. It demands surrendering the illusion of control that the ego clings to so desperately." The psychoanalyst James Hillman called this soul-making, the process by which the raw material of your experience is transformed into soul through attention, reflection, and meaning creation. Your struggles, viewed through this lens, aren't obstacles to your life's purpose, but the very substance from which purpose is forged. Consider the possibility that you weren't meant to have it all figured out by now. That uncertainty is not a problem to be eliminated, but a fertile void pregnant with possibilities. That the questions that haunt you, who am I? What matters? What is my purpose? Aren't puzzles to solve once and for all, but koans to live within, allowing them to continually deepen your relationship with mystery. This is the wisdom at the heart of all genuine spiritual traditions. The Zen concept of beginner's mind celebrates not knowing as the ground of true wisdom. The Taoist notion of Wu Wei advocates action without forcing, cooperating with the natural unfolding rather than imposing the ego's agenda. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart taught that God is found not through accumulation of virtue or knowledge, but through a radical emptying. Each of these traditions, through different language and practices, points to the same profound truth, that wholeness comes not through the ego's achievements, but through its surrender to something larger. This surrender isn't passive resignation, but active participation in a process that transcends your individual will. It requires what Jung called active receptivity, maintaining conscious awareness while allowing something beyond the conscious mind to lead. The paradox at the heart of this understanding is that the self you're trying to find through all your searching does not need to be created or achieved. It already exists, whole and complete, beneath the layers of conditioning, adaptation, and false identity. Your task isn't to build a self, but to remove the obstacles to experiencing the self that's already there. As the Zen saying goes, you are the sky, everything else is just the weather. Your essential nature, what Jung called the self with a capital S, remains unchanged beneath the constantly shifting thoughts, emotions, and circumstances that you've mistaken for identity. The final and most liberating truth is that you're not lost because you've taken a wrong turn or failed to achieve enough or haven't found the right path. You are lost because you've been looking for yourself where you cannot be found, in the external markers of identity that our culture mistakes for selfhood. The revelation that changes everything is this: the very feeling of lostness is itself the beginning of being found. The sense that something essential is missing is your authentic self breaking through the constructed identity, demanding recognition. The emptiness you feel in the face of achievement isn't failure, it's your soul as refusal to be satisfied with anything less than what is genuinely nourishing. In mythology and literature, the darkest moment, what Joseph Campbell called the belly of the whale, or what the mystics termed the dark night of the soul, always precedes the breakthrough. What looks like disintegration from the perspective of the old consciousness is actually the birth pangs of a new, more expansive awareness. What if you're not lost at all? What if you're exactly where you need to be, in the fertile darkness where new life gestates? What if this painful metamorphosis is precisely what's required for you to become who you truly are? This understanding doesn't eliminate the challenges of the journey. Integration remains difficult, often painful work, but it transforms your relationship to the process. Rather than struggling against your experience, you become curious about it. Rather than trying to fix yourself, you develop compassion for all that you are. Rather than fighting the darkness, you recognize it as the necessary counterpart to light, not its absence, but its complement in the wholeness you seek. And something remarkable happens when you embrace this perspective. The desperate quality of your seeking begins to dissolve. The anxious striving for fulfillment relaxes. You discover that what you've been searching for isn't found at the end of some heroic quest, but in the quality of presence you bring to each moment of the journey itself. This is the final paradox. When you stop trying to escape your lostness and instead embrace it as the very ground of transformation, you're no longer lost. When you accept the darkness as part of wholeness rather than its enemy, you're already found. When you welcome the death of who you thought you were, you create space for who you truly are to emerge. Jung captured this ultimate truth when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you should be. Not who others want you to be, not who your adaptive strategies have shaped you to be, but who you, in your irreducible uniqueness and complexity, already are beneath the layers of conditioning and protection. This is the homecoming you've been seeking all along, not to some external destination, but to the truth of your own being, not through achievement but through recognition, not by adding more but by removing the obstacles to what already exists within you, whole and complete. And when you experience this recognition, even if just for a moment, you understand that you were never truly lost. You were finding your way home through the only path possible, the beautiful, terrible, transformative journey of becoming fully human in all your glorious complexity. The lostness wasn't the problem. It was the path, and it has been leading you home all along.